Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight at the 2020 Virtual Fairfax County Public Schools Mental Health and Wellness Conference and Inova Act on Addiction Summit. This webinar series would not be possible without the generous support of Joan and Russell Hitt. Before I introduce our speaker, here are a few housekeeping notes. All participant lines have been muted and everyone's video has been turned off. We will be taking questions via the Q&A feature, and they can be submitted at any time. We will do our best to get to as many questions as we can. Our speaker today is Melissa Schlinger, Vice President of Practice and Programs with CASTLE. Melissa leads CASTLE's efforts to advance systemic implementation of evidence-based social and emotional learning in school districts across the nation. She oversees CASTLE's Collaborating Districts Initiative, CDI, which has grown under her leadership from 8 to 20 large urban districts implementing systemic SEL. She also oversees the development of school and district resources based on CDI learnings, as well as CASTLE support services. And last but not least, she also was a Fairfax County Public Schools teacher. I am very excited to hear from Melissa, so take it away.
Thank you so much. And I'm really grateful to be here today. Really excited to talk with all of you. Fairfax County Public Schools is a near and dear place to my heart. It's where I launched my own education career. As a teacher at Cub Run Elementary School. I also taught at Center Ridge Elementary School for a time, and really is an incredible district with incredible families and students and communities. So I'm really thrilled to be back working with you all today. I only wish this was in person so I could see you all. I imagine there might even be a person or two out in the audience that I may know from my former life. So thank you for having me. I also wanted to just share what we're going to be talking about today. Before, after I left Fairfax County, it's kind of a long and winding road that led me to CASTLE, where I oversee our practice work. And we'll talk more about who CASTLE is and what that means. This topic is so important because we know that social and emotional learning is so important at school and at home. And I know that all of you that have chosen to come to this session are really looking for information that can help you as an individual, help you as an adult, whether you are a parent or whether you are a teacher, or maybe you're both, or maybe you're a social worker. And in fact, I think we're gonna pull up a poll to see who is in our audience today. So if you could just take a minute to let us know if you are a parent, an educator, both a parent and an educator, or something else. If you could just take a second to let us know who's in the audience, that will give us a sense of who we're talking to. So it looks like we've got mostly parents, but we've got a lot of educators and a lot of folks who are both, and then some folks that fall into that other category. Great. Well, I have worked to put together information that I hope everyone in this presentation will find relevant. And I think before I get into the information, one thing I wanted to just make sure everyone in this meeting knows is that you are not alone and no one has all of the answers. And I will tell you, as a parent of 12-year-old sixth grade twins, last March when the pandemic struck and everything shut down, here I am, a parent of sixth graders, and I taught sixth grade, by the way, in Fairfax County. So I'm a former sixth grade teacher. I'm a social and emotional learning expert. I have resources and technology and one-to-one computing, and had what one might think of as an ideal situation if you are going to handle this transition beautifully and seamlessly. And I will tell you, even for us in this house, this was a really difficult transition. There was no playbook for this. There was nothing we learned in our pre-service or nothing we thought about, well, when my mom handled the pandemic this way. This was all new for all of us. And so it's normal to feel stressed and anxious and, you know, wondering how we can do a better job of this. And so I just want to let you know that even those of us with all the training in the world, struggled during this period. So what I'm here to do today is talk to you a little bit about who is CASTLE and what is SEL. Like when we even talk about social emotional learning, what do we mean by that? And then how does that actually get implemented and promoted in schools, and how can we promote that at home? And we'll break and have some time for questions and answers as well. So let's jump into a quick opener. We like to start everything with a quick opener. If you were here, if we were together, I would ask you to share your responses to this question with a partner. But I'd like for you to just jot down, you can put it in the chat or you can just jot it down on a piece of paper. If we were to ask our students, and whether that's your child or students you work with, 1 year from now about how they felt during the pandemic, what do you hope that they will say? So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to think about what do you want a year from now, when let's hope this is behind us, for students to reflect back on this time and say, during that period, I felt blank. I love looking at the chat. Loved, optimistic, hopeful, encouraged, supported, heard. I felt strong, I felt resilient, I felt secure, I discovered a new way to learn, I felt cared for, I learned to be flexible. These are great. So I want you to hang on to those thoughts. So what we're going to be talking about today is how do we make these hopes into a reality by how we support ourselves and how we can support those around us. So that's what we're hoping for in a year. Let's talk for a minute about some background information, and then we're going to get into the meat of it all. Let's see here. So who is CASTLE? The Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning has actually been around for 26 years with a mission to help make SEL part of every child's education, pre-K through 12. We've been at this for decades. In the last several years, but especially in the last year, there's been an awakening really about the importance of SEL, and that is in part because of all of the research that we've seen, and also because people's own experiences, and that they're coming to this understanding that SEL is really important and should be an important part of our education. The way that CASTLE works to advance this mission is that we have a team of researchers whose job it is to advance the science to help us understand what are the impacts of social and emotional learning. We also have a team that focuses on state and federal policy. In fact, one of their big initiatives is to focus on state departments of education. Virginia is one of those states, and I'm told that the chief in Virginia is an incredible person, Chief Lane. I was told to put a plug in for Chief Lane. He's done a great job in leading in this space. And then the practice of SEL is another, is the piece that I oversee. And that's where we're really trying to understand, you know, the research and policy is all great, but what does it actually mean in the classroom, in the school, in our school districts, and in our family? So what does it actually look like on the ground? And that's what we're going to talk about. I'm not going to talk a lot about research today. There's a lot of research on the benefits of SEL on our website. I'm going to just share one or two studies that I think are good summary studies, but there's lots more research. In fact, a lot of what we're talking about today, we're not going to get into the weeds on. I'm just going to scratch the surface, but I'm going to try to point you in the direction of places where you can spend more time learning more about the topics you care more about. So if the research is what you care the most about, there's plenty of that to be found on the castle.org website. This study, though, I thought was important to highlight because this is a meta-analysis, meaning that this actually summarizes 213 studies and treats them as one study. And in this study, they looked at the impact of SEL programming on over 270,000 students and discovered that when students have exposure to evidence-based SEL programming, they not only make improvements in social and emotional skills, which is what we would expect, But we also see improvements that are attitudes about self, others, and school, better classroom behavior, better improvements on achievement tests, which, as you can imagine, this got a lot of folks' attention, and reduced risks for conduct problems and emotional distress. And I think it's fair to say that everyone is going through their fair share of emotional distress. So knowing that social and emotional learning can help us improve in these areas and reduce the risks for conduct problems and emotional distress is a really important thing for us to just center on. Also, this was not just a one-shot study. There was a follow-up to look at which of those studies had longitudinal data. And of those, 82 of them actually followed students for a long period of time, and found that even after many years, kids were still showing benefits of social and emotional learning with higher academics, better attitudes, pro-social behaviors, better SEL competence, lower conduct problems, emotional distress, and drug use. And this was true regardless of socioeconomic backgrounds, race, or school location. So if you're interested in more data, there's lots more of that where that came from on our website, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on the research today. I assume that you all have to understand the importance of SEL or you wouldn't be here. So let's talk a little bit about how we even define SEL. So this is CASEL's definition, which is one of the most cited pieces from CASEL anywhere in journal articles and the media and lots of different places you'll see that we talk about SEL as a process, meaning that it's not just a one-shot deal, it's a process, and it's not just for children, it's for children and adults to effectively apply knowledge, attitudes, and skills so that we can understand and manage our emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain relationships, and make good decisions. So this is the kind of the definition of SEL. A lot of people, when they think about SEL, they think about the competencies of SEL. So you may have seen this wheel before. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to talk us through this wheel. The social emotional competencies are organized into these 5 areas. So you see these two, self-awareness and self-management, these are focused on the self. And when we start with self-awareness, we're talking about how do I know and understand myself? How do I feel? How do I understand my own identity, whether that's my cultural identity or a social identity? Do I recognize my own strengths and my own challenges? Do I believe that with work I can get things done? Do I have self-efficacy? You may have heard of a growth mindset. This is all part of our self-awareness. How do we understand our own self and who we are? The self-management has to do with what we do with that information and how we behave. So can I manage my impulses? Can I manage my stressful situations and coping, which we've had to do a lot of lately? Can I stay motivated even when I'm bored or disengaged? Can I stay regimented on a routine even if it's different from what I'm used to? Can I persevere? Can I set goals? Can I stay organized? All these things are part of our self-management. You may hear a lot of folks talking about things like grit. That would fall into self-management. It's part of persevering towards a long-term goal. So these 2 areas of orange are really how we understand ourselves and how we behave as an individual. These 2 green areas is really where we're talking about others. So social awareness is about, can I actually understand the emotions and perspectives of others? Can I read social cues? Can I understand what you may be feeling by your behavior, by your facial expressions? Can I actually put myself in your shoes and imagine what it must feel like to be in that position? Can I appreciate the views of people who are different from me? Can I show respect for different views? This is sort of part of our understanding of others. And then what do we do with that? So how do we communicate with others? How do we engage with others? How do we build relationships and work together on a team? How do we resolve conflict? These are all part of our relationship skills. Can we ask for help when we need it? Can we offer help when we see someone needs it? These are incredibly important in how we interact with each other. So when we talk about the green areas, this is sort of the social piece, the interacting with others in healthy and positive ways. And then responsible decision making is about putting that all together when you are trying to look at problems, analyze situations, predict consequences of those problems and who is impacted by those consequences, how you reflect on what's happened and make decisions, and how you behave responsibly, recognizing who am I, how do I fit into this world, how do I fit into this broader society, and how can I behave responsibly. So all of these things are the competencies that we think of when we think about social and emotional learning competencies. The next piece we're going to talk about is kind of how those get promoted in a school. So in schools, sometimes people think, oh, we're going to teach these competencies. Well, then I'm going to just teach lessons, right? I'm going to teach lessons on how we explicitly build those competencies. Well, that is one part of it, but actually your social and emotional competence is developing all the time through lots of different ways and different interactions. It happens in our classrooms with instruction, not just SEL lessons, but also how we're engaged in social studies and language arts, and even how discipline is handled or how our desks are arranged. That all will contribute to how we promote social and emotional learning in our classrooms. In the school, how discipline is handled, how kids are interacting in the cafeteria, in the hall, how you're greeted by adults. There's lots of things happening in the school that will impact your social and emotional competence development. And then of course, how that's happening at home and with community partners. That your SEL is actually growing and developing all the time. And so what we really want to see schools do is think carefully about all the different ways in which social and emotional competence is developed so that we can create positive learning experiences that and equitable learning environments. There's a lot of focus on relationships. You're going to hear me talking a lot about relationships. They are at the core of everything. And we want to make sure that those relationships are authentic and that they are inclusive. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, sometimes people look at this wheel and this ring and they say, okay, that's an interesting graphic, but I don't actually know what that looks like in a school. Like I see these words, but I don't know like what you actually mean should be happening. So this piece called the Indicators of Schoolwide SEL, for those of you that are school folks, you can get this on our website. This is the 10 things that you would see in a school that is systemically promoting SEL or promoting it in a school-wide way. That means SEL is infused into the systems of the school. So you'll notice the first thing on the list is that explicit SEL instruction, but there's also SEL that's promoted through academic instruction, opportunities for youth to have their own voice heard and have the youth voice and engagement. You'll also see that you have a supportive school and classroom climate. You'll see that the adults' own social, emotional, and cultural competence is prioritized. The discipline policy is supportive. You'll see that there are continuum of integrated support. So for kids who need more than what they're getting in the classroom, just like if you needed more math instruction than the core math instruction provided, you might have additional support. The same is true for SEL. And that we would have authentic relationships with our parents, and we would have aligned partnerships with communities, and that we would always be checking in on all of these things to ask ourselves, how is this going and how can I do it better? That's what's meant by this last piece, the systems for continuous improvement. So the question though is, if these are the things that we want to achieve in our school, this is really overwhelming. I can't do all of this. And we wouldn't expect a school to focus on all of these things all at once. But we do want to make sure that schools recognize that there's a comprehensive approach to social and emotional learning. So down here at the bottom left corner, you see this Schoolguide.castle.org. This is where, for school folks, you will see every resource you could possibly need to address any of these areas, and it's all free. The way in which we organize our work around systemic SEL is focusing really on how do you lay a strong foundation? That's in the organized section. So what are the things that we have to do to build awareness of SEL, get commitment from our educators, and ownership to create that plan? Like, how do we get ourselves organized? And then the green areas are like, what are we actually going to do for our adults and our kids? And then lastly, how will we know if what we're doing is working? So when I'm talking about the rest of this webinar, we're gonna talk about it in these categories. How do we get organized? What should we be doing for our adults? What can we do to support kids? And how will we know if what we're doing is successful? Those things we're gonna keep in mind because they're gonna frame everything that we're talking about. So first, for schools, we're going to talk about parents next. For schools, what should you be doing to get organized? If you don't already have an SEL team that is representative of different roles in the building, and ideally a parent as well, a SEL team is critically important to kind of own this work. On our school guide, you'll see ways to create a team and who should be on the team and how do you meet with the team and what can be on the agenda. But a team is really important. I'm only going to highlight a few of these organizational pieces right now, given our time, but there's lots more information on this. Secondly, communication has never been more important than it is right now. And that communication has to be two-way. So while it's great when districts are pushing out information to families, to kids, to teachers, to principals, there has to be two-way communication structures so that we can hear back from those folks as well. So making sure we have robust structures for communication is going to be key. And then also making sure that the professional learning needed for SEL is provided. What we're talking about today is just a drop in the bucket when we think about actual professional learning. And there's lots of places that you can go for deeper professional learning, but it's important that staff and community partners have professional learning and have plans for ongoing professional learning. And that's, again, something you can learn more about. So those are some of the things that are really important to just start off organizing. But what are we going to do for our adults in the building? So how do we strengthen the adults' capacity? So it's really important that we think about our adults and make sure that we recognize that our adults in our teachers, our principals, our district staff, even our superintendents are also experiencing incredible distress and trauma. Many of us are trying to balance our work life, our home life. We may have had people in our family who have had health challenges, economic challenges. This is an incredibly stressful time. So we really have to make sure that we are creating supports for adults around how they care for themselves. I know people talk about this all the time, the idea that you're going to put your own mask on, your own oxygen mask on first before attending to the child next to you. This is really important that we attend to our own health and well-being so that we can be healthy and present for the young people in our lives that we're working to support. So providing that professional learning and opportunities for self-care, professional learning around trauma-informed practices, because we used to think about trauma-informed practices where there's populations of kids that have high trauma, but we know that those practices are good for everyone, but especially today, we're all facing the effects of trauma. And also some specific professional learning on those distance learning strategies for building SEL are really important to think about how we can provide those for adults. Secondly, again, relationships are the most important buffer against the impact of trauma. We know that the stronger our support systems are, the less of the impact the trauma will have and the more likely we can be strong and resilient when we have strong support networks. So it's really important that structures are in place to foster those relationships and trust and collaboration among staff. Some of the districts that we've worked with have told us one silver lining is that they're seeing their districts and their teachers collaborating more closely together now than they ever have, because this is all new. Virtual learning is new, and maybe the seasoned teacher who's like, I do it my way and was less likely to collaborate, all of a sudden is at the table saying, how are we going to do this lesson online together? So really providing structure so that we can support each other, both professional collaboration, but also really supporting each other and building that community of trust is critically important. And that requires checking in personal ways, right? Not just checking in on how are we going to do this lesson, but how are you feeling? What are you, what was a silver lining for you today? Or what are you most looking forward to this weekend? Or how are you going to take care of yourself today? Or let's share some of our practices for how we have learned to cope. But really giving our adults an opportunity to connect with each other and support each other is so important. And also the adults in the building and in the district really need to be modeling those SEL competencies and mindsets. If we as adults are frazzled, we are modeling sort of that kind of coping for our kids. And while that doesn't mean, we are obviously all going to have moments where we're flying off the handle, where we're not coping well. That's okay. But to the extent to which we can talk about, oh, I didn't handle that very well, or to the extent to which we can talk about better ways to handle things, or model for the young people how to connect in positive ways and how to do some self-care, it's really important. SEL is something that kids are watching the adults and the kids around them all the time and learning from their behavior in ways that are really important. So we want to be thoughtful and intentional about how we're modeling. As a parent, sometimes I find myself when I'm just getting frustrated, and I'll even say out loud, like, I'm going to take a deep breath right now because I've asked you 3 times for this, and I'm trying not to yell, but I'm about to yell. And sometimes even just letting my kids know I am coping with this moment of frustration by taking a deep breath, and I'm telling you that the yelling is coming if you don't find your shoes or whatever it is. Sometimes it's also just modeling for them, like, oh, she's upset and she's calming down, and I see a healthy strategy. And also sometimes just saying that out loud makes me less likely to get to that yelling phase. But let's face it, we all get to the yelling phase at times. So we do want to be modeling, though, as best that we can. And sometimes when I have gone off the handle, whether it's in a teaching environment or a parenting environment, saying, wow, I really just lost it there, and here's why I lost it, and here's what I was feeling. And what I wish I had done is maybe counted to 10 or gone over to pet my dog before reacting to that. I wish I had just paused. So just kind of talking through what just happened and how it could have been done better is also a learning moment. So really being honest with our kids about, I just lost my temper, and what, but I wish, another way I could have handled that is this. So let's talk about the kids in school and how we can promote SEL for the students. So I mentioned a number of times already how important those relationships are, and it's so important to prioritize the adult to student relationships and the student to student relationships. And this is really tricky in a virtual environment, especially for those of us in the elementary school. Your kids just automatically now are going into a new 3rd grade class, and they may not recognize the other kids, or they may not know this teacher. They have no history with this teacher. And to try to start that off is a lot harder now than it was in the fall, in the spring, where when we went into quarantine, we already had those relationships established. So being really intentional about building those relationships is critically important. And I know that teachers are trying to do a lot of get to know you activities. Those are great, especially in the first 2 weeks of school. To the extent to which you can do any one-on-one conversations with students can also be helpful, to just have a quick 10-minute phone call with a student, to just have that outreach so that you have a one-on-one is really an important way for kids to feel heard as an individual and known as an individual. I think a lot of you said in the beginning, you want to feel heard, you want to feel supported. I know that that's not always easy to do, but to the extent to which we can prioritize those one-to-one connections and community builders within our activities is really important. At Castle, we start every big meeting with a community builder, especially if it's like a Monday morning, like, let's just take a minute to just whip around or throw into the chat, what are you reading right now? Or, what are you proud of today? Or just something so that we get to know each other as people before we get right to business. The same thing is true for kids. I also think one thing that's interesting, and I'm noticing with my own children, is the peer-to-peer relationships is really suffering, especially for the little kids that don't have a phone and they're not accustomed to texting their buddies. And it's so important. After the first day of school where I am, I asked my kids, like, did you talk at all today? And they're like, well, I said here, but oh gosh, that is not good student engagement. Like if they're just basically saying here when they're taking attendance. We want our kids to be talking, not just in the large group, but to each other. And I will say, as time has gone on, today I actually heard a rousing discussion in a small group about a math problem and semicircles, and I could tell it was a group of kids working through. That's real learning, but we really need to prioritize the opportunity for kids to work together in as best we can, whether you have a platform that allows for breakout rooms, or if you can think of other ways where you can set buddies, like go call each other and work through this. But having those opportunities to do that. I have a stepdaughter who's in law school, and she said she's assigned a different buddy each week in her law school classes to work together so that they're getting to know each other. So prioritizing those peer relationships, advisory meeting, morning meetings, check-ins are all really important. Also building the critical social and emotional skills. I know somebody asked, like, are there specific ones that are most important? Clearly, we're in a moment now where stress management and coping are really important, and helping kids really process their emotions. One thing I want to mention that we'll send out as a follow-up to this is that Castle hosts free webinars. We have been for the last 6 months, every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. On September 25th and October 2nd, we'll be doing a webinar on September 25th on adult wellness, and on September 2nd on promoting student wellness through this very thing. So we'll send you information about that. But helping kids recognize what is the emotion that I'm feeling, just having them pay attention to their own emotions and say it out loud and process through that is an important coping strategy. Helping us think through breathing and other ways of dealing with anxiety. And of course, again, relying on those relationship skills can be really helpful to build our social and emotional skills. Sometimes we found that schools are finding it's really helpful to do expressions of gratitude, appreciation, and service for others is a really important empathy builder and coping skill, where you take the focus off of this emotion and sort of think about those around you. So they're building social and emotional skills explicitly is really important. If your school has implemented an evidence-based program, or even if they haven't, on Castle's website under COVID resources, there's lots of free resources that program providers have offered for families and schools to explicitly build SEL skills during virtual learning. And then third, we want to talk a little bit about creating spaces where kids can actually use their own voice. I mentioned that I was disappointed to hear that my kids, I often don't hear them talking. We want to make sure we get the kids talking, and we also want to create space for kids to talk about some of those feelings that they're having. And I know sometimes that can be scary, but when you give voice to those feelings and create space for that, it is a really important coping and reassuring strategy to know that it's okay to talk about these things. A lot of our kids are facing a lot of distress over what's happening in the news, not only with the pandemic, but with racial injustices and other issues they may be facing, whether, you know, we've got schools in California that are facing even more trauma with fires. Creating that space for kids to talk about it also signals to them that this is important. How you're feeling is important, and this is not something that we're going to pretend like isn't happening. I think also we want to make sure that connecting with families and getting their input can be really helpful. If you can reach out to families, not because there's a problem, but because you really want to talk to this parent about, how does Will say things are going? What are you seeing at home that I might not be able to see through this virtual learning experience, is really helpful too. And then, of course, there are a lot of the role that community partners can play is critically important. I'm going to move on to the parents piece because I know we're running low on time. So there are things, and there are a lot of parents on this list. What can the parents do? I'm actually going to organize this the same way, where we talk first about what are some of the organizational and planning things that we can do. So one thing is the structures and the routines, which are key. We know that when kids have a predictable routine and structure, like where they know what to expect, that is a stress reliever. When we have things going in all different chaotic ways, that can add more stress. So with your children, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to create a physical environment that is conducive to learning at home, which means you want to have enough space, you want to have the right lighting, you want to have access to technology. I don't let my kids have their phones while they're doing e-learning, but I know some, that's their way to ask questions to their friends. But whatever that environment is that you and your kids can together decide, how do we want to create this environment? In fact, we actually took a room and repainted it just to say, like, we're going to create a new space for this, to try to create something that's free of distractions, and siblings and pets is really important. Also, talking together about, okay, what are we going to do when you get a break? What are some healthy things to do when you're on a break? And how can you maintain focus? And let's say you've got homework, you've got to read these 3 chapters. After one chapter, if you want to take a break and shoot some baskets for a while, set some rewards. But these are some things that you can set together. Like, what are our expectations for when homework gets done? Because a lot of times kids are like, look, I've been in e-learning all day. I don't want to just roll right into homework. But maybe kids just would say, I want to get right to it and get it over with. Whatever, involving your kids and how those routines go is an important way for them to be bought in, and to create some predictable structures. And then also, like, what are you going to do if you need help? This was something I had to do with my kids because I work. Like, if someone has a question, they're going to have to figure out a place to go that isn't always me. So where will you go if your technology isn't working or you can't get connected to the internet? What if you don't understand the lesson? Do you have a friend that you can call? What if the homework assignment was confusing to me? Now, with twins, they thankfully have each other, but having a system in place, knowing who are the different people I can call or I can go to if I need help, will also relieve some of that anxiety, just like predictable, like, okay, if this happens, here's what I can do. And then also checking in regularly. This is how we know if this is working, to ask your kids, how is this going? Do we need to make adjustments? Are you finding that this space that we created is distracting, or is it working for you? What could be better? So checking in and seeing, are these systems and structures we put in place working? And if not, how should we adjust it? So that's part of this just basic organization and plan. But let's talk also about the adults, meaning you all. So again, you need to take care of yourself and your own needs. So this is so important that you also have your own routines, your own physical environment, and your physical health prioritized, your mental health prioritized. So that might mean that you prioritize meditation or going for a run or just walking your dog or calling your sister or whatever it is that helps you feel connected and taking care of yourselves, whatever those routines are, to really honor those and take care of them, because you are doing your kids a huge service when you take care of yourself. That also means reducing the things that cause distress. And I know I've had to do this by limiting to a certain amount of time the social media, the news, trying to limit our negative ways of coping, like a bottle of wine or overeating, or there are lots of things that we need to really be thinking about. How can I reduce the things that are causing distress? How can I increase the things that make me feel comforted and healthy? And really prioritizing that. That is the best thing that you can do for your child. Also, don't forget about your own relationships. Just because you're not running into other parents at school or on the soccer field or in the places that you normally would, doesn't mean that those relationships shouldn't be prioritized. There are lots of ways that we can connect with each other. We just may need to be creative in how we do that. And especially some of the people that really were feeding our soul that we now no longer see, being intentional about fostering those relationships and support. Because remember, the relationships and the support networks that we have are our greatest defense against the effects of the trauma. The stronger those relationships are, and the better we will fare, and we will be less affected by this. So it's just so important that we really prioritize our own relationships and support systems. And then again, like we talked about this with the teachers, modeling that positive, inclusive, and healthy behaviors and coping strategies. There is a lot of bad behavior, I think, that we're seeing play out. And so, you know, your kids are going to be looking to you as teachers and parents about, you're a signal to them about how to behave during all of the chaos. So just recognizing that you are a model for them, and trying to be intentional about how you live that, because kids are watching and learning from you as their first teachers. Now, in terms of checking in to see how things are going, it's important you check in with yourself and ask yourself, how are you doing? Do you feel like you need additional help? Do you need to seek professional help, medical attention, a therapist? Don't just ignore your own mental health because you're too busy, because it will come back to bite you if you don't take care of yourself. So please do build your own adult capacity to support your children by taking care of yourself. When we think about what you can do at home with your kids, again, this is about maintaining their relationships. So thinking about how they can build relationships with peers, family members, teachers, and really fostering those opportunities. We've tried to make sure we Zoom with grandparents regularly. We've tried to actually do some postcards in the mail and writing letters. So sometimes we just forget about all the different ways that we can connect with people. It's not simply texting, although texting is great, but there's phone calls, there's FaceTime, there's email, there's text, there's letter writing, there's all sorts of ways we can connect with our support system, and trying to figure out ways that we can stay supported with each other. Also helping your child with their own stress management and coping skills. Again, number one being, how do they have those relationships, but also specifically helping your child understand and process their own emotions and speak it out loud, and really saying, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling disappointed, and acknowledging that emotion and making sure that you are affirming that emotion. So I think it's important, just that activity of speaking, you know, the experts like Mark Brackett will say, if you can name it, you can tame it. It's when we don't talk about how we're feeling that those things really eat at us. So just giving our kids permission to share how they're feeling, and talk about why they're feeling that way, and to think about like what might make them feel better, is a really important process to making sure that they have what they need. Also, there's lots of information out there that I'll share with you later, the resources on breathing and other kinds of stress management. But knowing that they're supported, and knowing that they can cope with these emotions, and knowing that there's someone who cares about them and is taking care of them and with them is key right now. I mentioned this earlier, practicing gratitude, empathy, and acts of kindness towards others is very much a coping skill and a stress reliever, and it's also building your social and emotional learning. It's a great way to step outside of yourself and contribute to others. So definitely think about practices for expressions of gratitude, maybe writing a letter to a teacher, or a note to a neighbor or somebody that you want to just express your appreciation for. It has a very therapeutic effect. So definitely modeling that and encouraging that can be really helpful. Also, when I think it's really important to not just try to fix problems for kids, but to ask them, you know, what do you think would be helpful right now? How do you think we should solve this problem? What would make you feel better about this issue? And really having them think about ways to solve the problem will build those muscles as well. as opposed to just, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Have you tried this? Have you tried that? Right? We want to actually engage them. And what do you think would make a difference here? How do you think it would feel if you did that? Why would that be a good idea or a bad idea? You're taking them through that process, but really helping them use their own voice and advocating for themselves. Whenever my children are disappointed in a grade or feel like something was unfair, just trying to get them to say, like, why don't you go talk to that teacher? And of my twins, one will say, could you just call? And the other one will say, I'll talk to the teacher. So kids are different, even twins, but recognizing that it's important that they use their own voice and develop their own agency. Also, it's important to talk about what is happening in developmentally appropriate ways. These topics are difficult, so we don't want to overwhelm little kids with heavy information about death tolls, for example, but we do want to talk about what's happening right now and why we're not in school, and talk about what we're seeing on the news, and give kids opportunities to process how they're understanding it. Because if we don't talk about it, they are still processing it. You just may not know how they're understanding it, and sometimes they're misunderstanding it. So we want to give them that space to share how they're feeling about it, what they're scared of, and know that you're there to listen and provide that support. So just giving them a chance in developmentally appropriate ways to talk about what's happening is really important too. And then again, checking in with your child. How are they feeling? Listening to those emotions, and what can we do differently? Just always asking yourselves, how can we do this better? And think about how we might make adjustments and how things are going. On this page is a number of resources. We're going to pass this out. These are all on our website. For the schools, these top two are really, really key. The Castle Guide to Schoolwide SEL, and also this Reunite, Renew, and Thrive, an SEL roadmap for reopening school. Those are like the crown jewels of resources, but also on the castle.org site, you'll see links to all of these, and we'll send this out to you. These are all these links. You can click on them and see lots of great information. Just like you carved out an hour for this session, I would encourage you to carve out an hour to dig into these resources on the thing that you care most about, because we just scratched the surface today, and I hope it was helpful, but there's a lot more that you can do even on your own, or you can participate in additional webinars, but I would recommend continuing your learning. And same for parents. On our website, under COVID resources, you'll find these that have, there's a blog you can sign up for. You'll see lots of great information about how to build positive conditions for learning at home. So this is just a sampling of those. But again, I encourage you to set aside an hour, just like you did for this, to say, I'm going to look at these resources for an hour and actually do that. Sometimes we send out resources, but then they don't get looked at, but prioritize that. And then lastly, I just want you to go back to that original question and think about, at the beginning of the session, when we asked you to think about what you hope students will say a year from now about how they felt during this time. This is really up to us to try to make those wishes a reality. And I want to be optimistic that we have it within us to create that truth for ourselves and for our kids. So all I want you to do right now is, on that same piece of paper or in the chat, just think about one commitment that you will make today to help ensure that that SEL is part of your child's experience. And that might be, I'm going to spend some time with resources, or I'm going to rethink the learning environment, or I'm going to prioritize my own health, or whatever it is. Just make one commitment to yourself about how you want to use the information that you heard today and keep going. So I'm going to just peek into the chat and see the kinds of things that people are putting in here. I'm going to connect with students. This is really helpful. I'm going to carve out an hour. I'm going to continue learning. I'm going to make talking time for students. I love that one. I'm going to practice more yoga and mindfulness. That's great. Increase the peer-to-peer relationships. Love that. Have meals as a family every day. I love that. We do that as a family, and one of the things we love to do during mealtime is just do a high and a low of the day every day. All four of us do it, and you learn a lot about what they're proud of and what didn't go well. I encourage any of those conversation starters during mealtime to get kids talking about what's going well and what isn't. Can be really enlightening. This is great. I'm going to actually then, I think we're going to move over to the Q&A section. So let me just transition to that period here. I've got the questions here. So the first question that's popping up is, great. Do you have a favorite website, ideally multilingual, to give parents wellness tips? So Castle has actually, this is such a great question because it's really overwhelming. What we've tried to do at Castle is curate the best of the resources. And what I mean by that is we, like you, get bombarded with resources. We have a team of people that are assigned to read the resource and do kind of an internal rubric scoring and then meet to decide whether or not we put it in our own curated list. So I'm going to have to point you to the Castle COVID resources because I will tell you that we have experts that are vetting those to try to reduce the amount of noise that you are bombarded with. So check that out. And we are updating that all the time. With respect to the multilingual, so I mentioned that we're doing these webinars at Castle. On October 9th, we're going to be doing an SEL 101. We're going to repeat that in November in Spanish. The date hasn't been announced yet, but I was in it. You heard it here first because I was in a meeting earlier today and we agreed to prioritize Spanish speaking SEL 101 in November, and that will include a lot of resources for Spanish speaking families. Okay, next question is, do you have any thoughts on having conversations that highlights the rationale for creating routines and structure without it being perceived as or interpreted as telling parents how to parent or manage? I agree that can be tricky because teachers don't want to feel like they're telling parents how to parent. I think the key here is that it's really about the students and their engagement in that process. It's not about telling the parents to create that learning space. It's about telling the students to, with your parents, create a learning space and maybe even having them kind of think through a few categories, whether it's lighting or distractions or workspace or technology or a plan for asking questions, and working with the parent and kind of so that the students are actually owning the process makes it a little easier than feeling like you're telling parents how to parent their kids. And let's face it, we are in this together, and we sometimes people will say, well, isn't SEL something that parents and churches should do and teachers should stay out of this? And the thing about that doesn't make a lot of sense is that our kids' social and emotional development is happening all day, every day. And it would be almost malpractice if we didn't pay attention to it, in my view. We have to acknowledge what they're going through and do our best to be intentional and promote positive social and emotional development, because if left to their own devices, we know that doesn't always happen. So it's about working together on this. It's not about you do this, we do that. Question, it takes a village. What are the best ways to address these things on a community neighborhood level where people tend to keep to themselves? I think that's a great question. And I think trying to, in our neighborhood, getting outdoors is some of the safest ways for us to interact with each other, although it's still kind of away, with a distance. And we've seen our neighborhood come together around some of the social media, like this is just your neighborhood. Now I know that sometimes that can be toxic too, but trying to get our neighborhood to recognize that we are all in this together is tricky. I think though that really getting your community partners engaged in this can be really helpful as well. But what we at Castle are really hoping is that everyone sees SEL as their job. And when I say everyone, I mean not just teachers and parents. I mean the bus driver, the custodian, the front office staff, the superintendent, the guidance counselor, the neighbor. We are all here to promote the social and emotional development of all of us. And in fact, again, on October 15th, Castle's national conference, which got moved to a virtual summit, will be happening. And our theme this year is catalyzing our commitment to SEL. And we are really trying to help everyone see that they have a role in this, and help them all see that role and commit to that. I think it's a really important piece. So you can find that on our website as well. Oh, this is an interesting one. Is there a particular order you would teach the competencies in? In fact, one of the questions that came up earlier was, should I be asking the teacher to promote, like how is my kid doing in social awareness and self-awareness? And I think that that's an interesting question. So these competencies are interrelated. It's not about teaching, like you wouldn't just teach self-awareness before you taught self-management because they are interrelated. So we would encourage you to take a developmentally appropriate lens to all of them at the same time. Now, some are more foundational to others, but we wouldn't say, start here and end with responsible decision making, but they are all interrelated. And I think when we talk about, like, one of the questions that came up earlier was, should we be focusing on specific ones right now? And I do think that the connecting and relationship skills one is critically important right now. And also those stress management, calming, sort of emotion management pieces are also extra important right now, but that doesn't mean that these other things are not important. The other thing too about one person asked when we have a meeting with the teacher, should I ask questions about how my child is doing in each of the 5 areas? And I think more you want to ask questions about how they're doing overall. Do they seem happy? Do they seem engaged? Do you see them connecting with others? Are they helpful to others? Do they ask for help when they need it? I mean, you all know kids that will not raise their hand, even if they have a question. So those are some things to pay attention to. Does my child ask for help when they need it, either from another child or from a teacher? Those are kinds of the questions I ask my kids' teachers all the time. Are they kind to the others? Are they a good team member when they're doing collaborative structures? I'm interested to know, do they lean into leadership opportunities or hang back? And neither of those are better or worse, but it's good to understand the social and emotional development of your children. Another question, as parents, should we be monitoring the relationship building during virtual instruction or allow that to happen naturally? So this is really tricky, and I don't think there's a playbook for this, but I do think that the tendency to listen at the door is large, and I think we need to trust our kids and trust the teachers who are doing just an incredible Herculean effort to do the best that they can, but be inquisitive and supportive of both the teachers and the kids outside of that. But I don't think we need to monitor that. Now, generally speaking, I do think we need to monitor our kids' interactions with others. I mean, I definitely look through my children's text messages and make sure that they are using media appropriately and they don't have social media. But so I'm not suggesting that you not pay attention and not do your job as a parent. I just think we need to trust our educators to do the best that they can with what they have, and educators to communicate with you all together as much as possible. That relationship is so important. I think we are just about one last question. Peer-to-peer relationships for a 3-year-old who is not in preschool, that is heartbreaking, and I don't actually have a great solution for that. Castle's really focused on pre-K through 12, but to the extent to which you have opportunities to, I will say, I know that there are young kids that get very fascinated by seeing other kids on Zoom and interacting that way, but that's really no substitute. I wish I had a better answer for that, but I'm afraid that I don't actually have a good one for 3 years old. I would encourage you to look, though, online at some of those organizations like An Ounce of Prevention or others that focus on that 0 to 5 space, that they probably do have good suggestions there. So if I can go back to the slide with the teacher resources, sure. And I think I'm gonna turn it over. Here we go. No, here we go. I think I'm turning this over back to Bethany. And I just also, before she jumps on, just want to thank you all for hanging in there with me for an hour this evening. And I wish I could see your faces, and I wish that we could be in person. And I'm hopeful to have a chance to come back to Fairfax County and do something in person with you all. So thank you so much.
Melissa, thank you so much. I know I was frantically taking notes throughout this. This has been a wonderful event. For more information on the remaining webinars or for resources on substance abuse and addiction, please visit actonaddictionnow.org. We are also putting this link in the chat. Our next webinar is Managing Emotions, How to Talk About Feelings. So kids will talk about feelings, kind of some of the things we started to talk about tonight, with Ellie Pritchard Dodge on Tuesday, September 16th at 6 p.m. That's tomorrow night. Yes, Wednesday, sorry. We would be so appreciative if you could also take our survey. The link is also being put in the chat for you. This will help us evaluate our sessions for this year and provide vital information to shape next year's conference, whether virtual or in person. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you at the next webinar tomorrow. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.